pop in if you've just joined where you're logging in from. And wonderful to have you join us here today. So the remote versus hybrid debate. Which is better for your company and employees? So we've got representatives from Juno, Pilot, Playroll, and Talenta here with us today. So let's have a look at what we're going to cover today. And let's also get a feel for the people that have joined, you know, what your plans are. So we're gonna move through a couple of different plans now to move through the start of the webinar. If you don't know me, you can simply pop in Rowena Hennigan into Google. Recently featured in the Harvard Business Review, a career highlight for me on the topic of digital nomadism. So I'm in very good mood about that. I know the article has had over 20,000 views, so I'm delighted. And guess what? Because I'm writing about digital nomadism, I'm certainly a remote first advocate. Maybe the name Row Remote gives it away as well. So, but I'm really keen because many of the clients I work with, many people that I work with are using a hybrid model. So really keen to have a lively discussion here today and extend my thinking on the whole remote versus hybrid. Thank you again to Safety Wing for organising and hosting this webinar series. If you don't know Safety Wing, you have a chance to check them out today, offering global benefits for a remote workforce, remote health as well. You can see the different products offered there on their product roadmap. So be sure to check out Safety Wing, and I'd like to thank them from the bottom of my heart for hosting these webinars, which I always find are a wonderful chance to share and have brilliant discussions with my peers. So check out Safety Wing, and let's have a quick look at the agenda. Nothing too complicated, but as I invited you to at the start, any questions, comments, opinions you have about remote versus hybrid, start to make a mental note or a paper note of them here. I've got my notepad ready to go. We're going to do a quick poll to set the scene today, and we're going to see a little bit about the audience that are joining. We're going to move to the panel discussion, and we've already had some prep in the green room, so we're ready to rock and roll today, and then we're going to move on to the Q&A. So lots of chance to ask questions. We want to understand what your plans are. Are you a borderless organization? So let's look at the poll. So you've got a poll popping up there, which Charles has loaded. Let us know, how many countries are you currently operating in? How many countries are you currently operating? So have a look at the selection there. Got quite a few responses coming in. Fantastic to see that. About 50% of you are voted. Oh, you're quick off the mark today. Quick off the mark today. So that's fantastic. Let's see whether what your plans are, how many countries you're in. Maybe you've no plans at all. Maybe you're just curious about remote versus hybrid. So we're keen to know. We've got about 70% of people who have voted. Let's give it another couple of minutes to give people a chance to vote. Fantastic. If you haven't voted yet, you've got another. There we go. So let's see what kind of a profile we've got here today. So almost 27% in 6 countries or more. If you add the 13%, that's not bad. Maybe about half of you thereabouts in currently borderless or working in more than one country with your teams dispersed and distributed work there. And then we've got a mix of others, 14%, you're planning it, for sure. And some of you saying, no, definitely not. And today could be of just as much interest to you, because obviously it is all about how we practically implement with intention our remote model of any type, including hybrid, within our organization as leaders. And I know many people are joining, our leaders and HR leaders, so welcome. So I'm delighted to introduce, look at this fantastic panel we have here today. Lee Carlin joining us from Talenta. He is over in Chile currently, so I'm delighted to welcome Lee. Ginny Lisk from Juno, based in the UK at the moment, HR and people leader. We've got Matt Drozinski. I hope I've said that right, Matt. You can correct me in a moment, from Pilot. Matt is joining us from San Francisco. Pretty early in the day for you, Matt. Hope you've had your chosen beverage this morning. And Louis from Playroll. Delighted to have Louis on a panel again. Louis and I know each other from a previous event. So welcome. Going to ask the panelists to pop on and show us their smiling faces, and hopefully I am going to, when they're all here, so welcome, lovely to see you all. Welcome, welcome. Are you the type to waves on webinars? Okay, get some waves going, get that energy up. Brilliant. So waves from around the world. Going around the virtual room, I'm going to start with you, Louis, then Matt, then Ginny, then Lee. Could you introduce yourself, maybe say where you are today, and give us a quick little bit of background, quick as you can, so we can move on with the debate.
Thanks, Rowena. I'm Lou. I'm in London. I work for a company called Playroll. I'm honored to be back and engaged in this exciting and meaningful discussion today. Playroll is the employee-first employer of record platform. We empower people-centric organizations to grow global teams by hiring, payroll, and compliance across 180 countries. This discussion is really important and valuable to me. I've worked in hybrid models, remote models, and today my opinion is not reflective of the company, but I'm going to be arguing mostly for a hybrid model. So looking forward to a lively debate today. Thanks.
Fantastic. Matt.
Hey, I'm Matt. I'm calling in from San Francisco today, and I started a company called Pilot. We're an all-in-one people platform for remote teams, so we help other companies set up payroll, benefits, compliance for all of their employees, remote, local, all-in-one tool. And I'm a big proponent of remote. I've only ever worked remotely all my life, so I have about 15 years of kind of remote work experience behind my belt. And I'm going to be taking the position that I think you have to go all in. It's either remote or in person. I think hybrid is not the way to go.
Oh, bold statement, Matt. We're going to be friends. Matt, we're going to be friends. Oh, that's and come on, where's the hybrid advocates? Ginny, what about you?
She's here. She's a hybrid advocate. Hello, everyone. I'm Ginny. I am super happy to be here. I'm joining today from London in the UK. I am an ex-VP of People, so I guess I'm a sort of HR person in the room, as I know many of the attendees are. I'm here today representing Juno. Juno are on a mission to enable people to take control of their own well-being. We're a global benefits platform giving employees flexible access to really meaningful benefits all in one place. And yes, I am very much on the side of choice and flexibility, whether we call that hybrid or otherwise, and how we brand it. But yes, flexibility for the win.
Fantastic, Ginny. Fantastic, and great to have someone who's also going to, I don't know if you know about Irish culture, but we love a lively debate. So it's not about being right or wrong. It's all about just having a good open discussion. So I know in different cultures that means different things. In Spain, it's quite a common thing as well. But I love that you're taking and being proud there about what you believe in. Fantastic. Lee, you tell us.
Hey everyone, I'm Lee Carlin. I'm one of the co-founders at Talanta. And at Talanta, we are creating a borderless world for talent, a world in which companies can access, train, and hire the best global early talent. Since 2011, we have matched over 12,000 students and graduates with internships and graduate schemes globally. And we've seen the changing motivations and behaviors of Gen Y, Gen Z as they enter the workforce, especially over the last few years. In terms of remote versus hybrid, since we founded in 2011, we have actually always adopted a global approach to working, a flexible approach to working, in which we've had a mix of hybrid and 100% remote. So I've seen what's worked well and some things that maybe haven't worked so well as well.
Fantastic. So we've got such a wide range of experience, and I think, you know, there isn't probably a right and wrong. Like in lots of things in life, there's lots of gray, isn't there? There's lots of nuance. There's lots of personal choice and empowerment that we should be considering as leaders for a modern workforce. And that's certainly what I want to keep as the theme as we discuss the two areas. So I guess what I'm going to propose we do is we're actually going to start with the panel discussion with the pros and cons of hybrid. Okay, so rather than going with remote first, let's go with hybrid. So let's have a look at the throwing it out around the room, right? And Ginny, I'm going to go to you first because you claimed your stake early. Give your top 3 pros for hybrid.
Okay, top 3 are, first of all, and I alluded to this in my introduction around sort of how we brand these things and the language that's involved. You know, I find words like remote and distributed like inherently quite negative. So I think one of the, certainly from the people perspective, one of the benefits of talking about hybrid is that it is inherently flexible and does sound like something that is a positive cultural addition. And I think therefore it gives HR practitioners, much more remit to be doing positive cultural work through these periods of change, and certainly in terms of thinking about the future of work. On that point, I think that hybrid is what is optimized for a future of work. I think that individuals progressively more and more, and there's lots of talk about generational differences, but actually I think just as humans coming out of pandemics and in current sort of macro climates of, again, more change, people do feel like they want more autonomy, and not meeting them where they're at is, frankly, I think, not going to be a competitive advantage. And I think for the majority of individuals, either extreme is too much, right? Never being able to engage in person with your colleagues versus always having to be in an office. Those extremes tend to not create that nuance that you were talking about, Rowena. And then I think in terms of the third point, again, this is a sort of biased HR person's perspective probably, but I think it allows for real intentionality around the purpose of locations, right? And the types of work you do. It gives people the ability to not feel guilty about needing to be potentially antisocial to do, for example, deep work. We're not all in the same type of roles, right? Like there are roles where, certainly in certain engineering roles, actually quiet and focus is how you deliver, where it also enables people to go in and really benefit from time together, and so office design, physical space, how that enables a differentiated type of work is all stuff that I think HR people need to be thinking about. But yeah, I think it's I think it gives a huge opportunity there to create those opportunities for people to do their best work.
Fantastic, Ginny. So elegantly put. And I loved what you said about language. I'm going to pull that one out particularly because having worked with different clients who have whatever model in place, and we can avoid all the different labels, it's how they interpret that, whatever they're doing, and whether it's flexible. It can be called hybrid, it can be called distributed, it can be called remote first. So I really agree with that. It's the application and making it work for you. I'm going to go to Lee next, and then I'm going to go to Matt and then Louis. So Lee, your take on what could be the pro? I mean, Ginny's given a long there. So what do you see as the pro of hybrid?
I think one of the pros is, I think a recent EY study declared that 9 out of 10 employees want flexibility, and I think 50% of those would like to work at least 2 or 3 days remotely. So I think it's accepting that the world of work is changing, and I think the flexibility is something that people can use day to day to have more fulfilling and productive lives. I like hybrid, but I do see some potential issues. So rather than go into those issues, maybe we should continue with the pros.
Continue with the pros. Good man. You know when to pass on. You know when to pass on. Matt, dig deep. Dig deep, Matt. Okay, some pros for hybrid.
Trying not to get into an argument right off the bat. I think I would like to frame this conversation around sort of defining hybrid. I think there's a lot of different ways to think about this, and I have sort of different levels of feelings about sort of hybrid depending on how you define that, right? Obviously with sort of some companies define hybrid as we're going to have everyone work out of the same city, 3 days in an office, 2 days working from home. That's one way to do hybrid. Another way to do hybrid is I'm going to have my engineering team work remotely and I'm going to have everyone else work from the office 100% of the time. That also qualifies under the sort of the definition of hybrid. And I think it's difficult for me to talk about pros and cons of hybrid without sort of differentiating between all of these different models, because I do think that they have very different trade-offs, right? If we're framing sort of hybrid as sort of, this flexible option, like great, I mean, flexibility is good. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of companies go remote and distributed is for flexibility specifically. But I just think you have to be really mindful which flavor of, like, what does hybrid mean for you and which flavor you're adopting and what consequences that has for your organization, and think through the pros and cons. Not just in terms of, oh, hybrid's great, hybrid's not great, but like the variant of hybrid that we're about to practice, what are the pros, what are the cons?
Nice. I really like that angle on it, Matt. Really like. I think believe it or not, I can see a real thread through all of what you've said so far. So Lou, no pressure, but with that positive angle on as well, and you're working hybridly, I know with Playroll, or you have done. What do you take away as the main pro you'd like to propose?
Definitely great points from the previous panelists. It really depends on the organization and what stage you're at. I like to look at the pros of hybrid in the context of how they can promote innovation and collaboration. For me, if I were to break it down into just 3 main points, that one of those is better brainstorming. Those kind of opportunities to actually be in person, sit around a table, write ideas out together and really hash things out can be really great from an innovation perspective. The second one being increased face-to-face interaction can be really good for morale, and similarly have an important impact on innovation and kind of taking new ideas from idea to implementation. And with that, really the enhanced idea sharing across the whole organization. If you do have those moments where you're in an office environment, maybe even if it's just 1 day a week, and you get that chance to really work with your peers and think about why are we doing this? What are the steps that we need to work on this project? Yes, you can do that in a fully remote model, but some of the communication nuances you might not be able to pick up over a screen, or you might get some benefit from that conversation that happens after the meeting breaks and you're walking to the bathroom or you're walking to the snack bar and you bump into your colleague and you say, well, what about that? Or I just thought about that. And those kind of moments are really critical for collaboration, for innovation, and for taking ideas and driving them forward in a productive way. So I like to frame the kind of pros of hybrid mostly around that context of idea sharing and communication.
Wonderful, and I think we've nearly covered all the gambit. If you Googled now hybrid, benefits or even hybrid challenges, we've touched on nearly all of them. The definition, the language, the flexibility, because as you said, Matt, if it's hybrid with constraints, with limits, with location constraints, it's a very different kind of hybrid. Louis, what you've said about innovation, collaboration, culture, hear you. Again, for every single one of those, I have evidence-based articles I can refer to that show that remote first can also meet those. But again, it depends, back to Ginny's point, because we're trying to be as inclusive as possible as leaders, that not every role is suited to hybrid potentially. Sometimes you do need to co-locate, you do need to meet. And again, having worked with different clients, I've heard all of these things. So I think what's really interesting though, and I know some of you struggled with the pros of hybrid, is I think what I'd like to pull out is that if we go to look at the cons, which we'll see when we go over, of course, the remote first one, because it's going for that all in one or the other and probably can potentially negate some of those. Let's frame it a different way. Someone joining today, we want some tips from you. They're doing hybrid, okay? I'm going to be very blunt with everyone, right? I know the reality out there. I know there's corporate real estate contracts. I know there's many, many reasons why people pick hybrid, because employees vote for it, depending on there's lots of reasons. So you're going to do hybrid. Looking around the room, right? One piece of advice on how you do that hybrid policy, or how you do that flexible work policy with a co-located location or space, right? That looks to being digital first or remote first, because I'm sure you all appreciate that if we're going to be remote some of the time, we need to think about that. So what, and I've given a hint there, what other piece of advice? So Lee, I'm going to start with you, I'm going to go to Ginny, Louis, and then to Matt. One piece of advice to someone who's joined today is saying, I'm doing the hybrid thing, what would you tell me to do? I'm going that model.
I think that I've seen hybrid work extremely well and not so well in certain companies. And I think the intentionality is absolutely critical. I think the idea of saying you can work in an office 2-3 days a week and have 2 to 3 days off is great, but without the intentionality around creating structures and processes designed to make sure teams are communicating, there is that face-to-face contact, you understand days in which certain teams will benefit from being in the office with others, etc., etc. I think you really need to make that system of hybrid really intentional. Otherwise, it can just become a case of I go to the office some days and essentially people are working remotely for all intents and purposes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and that makes total sense, right? Why are they in the office if they're just on Zoom calls and answering all virtual messages? Ginny?
I think my one piece of advice would be don't go straight to policy, right? Like if you think that you're going to do this, quite often I have seen businesses skip a number of steps and thinking, okay, how can we in this sort of very top-down way construct and write that policy and put the terms and conditions in place to try and control our employees around that sort of arbitrary measure of number of days. I think my advice would be in the gap, you know, be more design driven, take more input from the people this is going to impact, and particularly listen to your leaders and managers around how this could help and optimize for things like that cross-functional collaboration when it is happening with intent.
Nice, that's a really good one there. Lou?
Yeah, definitely following on that, but the next step of when you actually do go to implement the policy, I don't like to use the word policy, but I think it is important when you do go and implement your hybrid policy, let's say, that it needs to be consistent across the board. Otherwise, there's going to be chaos. You can't appear to favor certain employees or certain seniority levels in the company. So that is inherently one of the cons with hybrid, is that flexibility with a limit. But I think it's particularly when we're framing the question and recommendations in the sense of how it benefits your team or your organization, this is where having a good policy in place can ensure that you're addressing those potential issues of equality and whether someone's commute is longer than another's, or someone's home environment. Someone might have a very difficult commute to the office. So making sure that a policy is in place that takes that feedback in from the employees, but also is consistent enough to kind of create a structure and results afterwards.
Fantastic, Lou, and I'm really glad you brought in that equality and maintaining equity, making sure you're being as equal as you can. Huge theme in my work with companies looking at hybrid, and I've shared a link on a really good article on that, which hopefully Charles will share out in a couple of minutes. 10 ways to ensure equality in your hybrid teams. So I'm really glad you raised that, because you spurred that reminder by one of my peers, Laura Alfaro. So I really recommend that article if Charles can share it in the chat. I really appreciate that. Matt.
I just wanted to echo what everyone else I think was saying. Like if you're going to go hybrid, like commit to it, make sure you're setting clear expectations for people. If you even have one person that's fully remote in a hybrid environment, you have a remote company, right? And the more people you're allowed to work remotely, the more of your company will either suffer, right? Because you haven't optimized your company for that remote first environment. So I think you just need to make that decision, right? If you're making that decision, you're going remote, make sure this applies to everyone. Build sort of synchronicity into this process. I think one of the things that I've seen work well in remote is making sure that sort of work from home days are consistent across departments, that you have sort of clear expectations. It's not just like, oh, you have to come in to the office 3 days out of the week, but you pick which 3 days. Like, I think that's a lot less effective than if your company knows, okay, like I know that I can expect Wednesday through Friday, everyone's at the office, right? So you sort of have to set these expectations, make sure that they're applied consistently, and I think that's the way to go.
Wonderful, some fantastic advice there. So what I'd like to move on to now, and there'll be more chance to come back to the models and comparing the two models afterwards. Okay, so I want to encourage, well, it's just going to take a moment because we're breaking to go over to remote first. We might need to reset. We know the people who have perhaps the favor there. But also I'd like to encourage the audience. I see some questions coming in. So take a minute. You've heard a lot. It's a lot to digest. I encourage you. You've got some fantastic experts here. They really, really know their onions, as they say. So make sure you connect with them on LinkedIn. Check out their companies, and you can link up with them as well. They've all got wonderful services in this space to offer. So I encourage you to do that, but also make sure you get your questions in. We're watching the questions come in, and we will deal with them either as we go or at the end. So moving over to the remote first. So we're going to take the same angle, right? Let's go to make sure we can cover it off. one advantage, okay? So, Ginny, I'm going to go to you first, right? So, you're on the debating team now, and you've been asked to handle the opposite side, my friend, right? I did it many times in school, okay? You're
Me
arguing
too.
for the you are great skill, by the way. You're arguing for a remote first. What's the one thing that you would say is a really, okay, we're looking at both sides. What could be the biggest advantage of remote first? Then I will go to Lee, to Matt, and to Lou last.
I think for me, and actually this isn't me having to sort of put my remote first hat on too much, because I agree exactly with what Matt just said around the clarity that remote creates, right? You don't end up with this sort of muddy middle where you're trying to work out the rules of engagement and how that can be equitably different offered out, and how, you know, departments can optimize for cross-functional engagement. It's all just, this is a baseline simplifier. I do completely acknowledge that it is probably, from that perspective, easier, not in a lazy way either, just in a clarity and managed expectations sort of way. I think that is the overarching clear benefit from my perspective.
Nice and elegantly put, thank you. So going to go to Lee next, then Matt, then Lou.
I think for me, one key advantage would be is just the access to a global talent pool. I think you no longer need to be restricted by location of employees. You no longer need to compete with companies for that best talent. I think what we found, we wrote a white paper with MIT back last year about the competition for talent globally, and we found that, you know, there's a huge amount of untapped talent pools right across the world, but also in the UK, as an example, the north of England, other places where typically they've been ignored by many employers, there's fantastic talent and opportunity to contract people wherever they may be. And I think that having that advantage is huge when it comes to getting the skills and competencies you need to succeed as an organization.
Fantastic, great point. Talent, attraction, obviously geographic diversity we could add in there as well. I've got to stop my bias. Okay, Matt. Matt.
So I'm going to start with something maybe potentially controversial, because I spent probably more than half of my time convincing companies why they shouldn't be remote. And I think it has to be a very, very explicit decision that a company makes. I think remote is really hard. I think it's really hard to do well. I think people think that they can just roll in and say, oh, we're a remote company now, and everything's going to work out, right? And I think that's a huge misconception, right? And I think a lot of companies get burned by this time and time again. I think when remote is done right, though, if you invest the right sort of resources into it, you put the right structure in place, one of the sort of benefits that I think people don't realize is how scalable that model can be. So I think the downside is you end up having to do a lot of work, both in terms of the communication and the processes inside the company, the sort of the managing of that part, but even just the infrastructure of, you know, how do I go about and hire people in 5 different states across the US and 17 different countries, right? It's a lot easier if I had all of my employees in San Francisco. It's the same set of rules, the same regulations. I figure it out once, it's done. I don't have to worry about it again, right? So I think by choosing to be remote, you're front loading a lot of that effort. Like, you have to figure a lot of these things out much earlier in the life cycle of your company. But I think because of that, you have a much more scalable platform to kind of grow from. And I think a remote company that's 10 employees, 100 companies, 1,000 employees, they're actually a lot more alike than in the office first world, where there's a lot more of these breaking points where you kind of, as you go, you have to really reinvent a lot of your processes internally. Because I think at scale, any company eventually kind of is a remote company. Like, if you look at your sort of, you know, Fortune 500 and the amount of sort of communication and collaboration that happens between different departments, between different offices globally, like, you're effectively remote. You might be spending most of your time working with folks that are not in the same building as you are, right? So by being remote, you're kind of putting a lot of that infrastructure in place early, and you get to reap the benefits of that. Obviously, the expense of having to put a lot of effort into to make that happen.
Beautiful, beautiful. It's an honest truth that everyone needs to hear. You can reap the benefits, but it is not easy. There isn't a simple blueprint. It's a harder setup, to Matt's point, and having helped and running my own freelance company with, my team are fully remote. I know it, I've seen it. It isn't something you can snap your fingers. So hybrid sometimes is the choice because it's the easier building block or step. I think we're all going to agree to that. And something I truly believe in, Matt, is, apart from loving your honesty and the detail you've gone into there, that it does and it can eventually pay off. There's no guarantees in anything in life, including business, but also that it can be a transition hybrid to fully remote. And it can be seen as a building block if you look at it like that, if that's something strategically you want to look at later on. So that's something as well I've come across. So thanks for your honesty, Matt, there. And I think that's a really, we don't want to sugarcoat it. I certainly don't. And I think that's a really pertinent point you've made. Rather than going full pro, he's given it with a caveat. Lou, would you add anything different to what's been said so far?
Well, I'm actually going to take my point, which was a pro for hybrid, and argue that it's also a pro for remote. That being increased innovation and collaboration, but the expansion of that in a cultural sense. So, for example, if you're an individual and you're based in the UK, you may never have interacted with or worked on a team with someone based in Australia or Argentina. But being in a remote organization will allow you to do that. And the idea is that you're going to get from not only understanding that person's experience and the way they might view the world differently, but also the way they address the same business problems that you're going after together. That's going to be really positive for collaboration and innovation because you're bringing different perspectives to the table. And that really, on a truly geographical level, is only possible in a kind of truly remote environment where you are accessing talent, as Lee said, in every country, and that there are amazing talent pools available. So then, what do you do with that talent? It is really positive when you look at it from a I'm learning something different as an employee because my coworker is based in a country, is from a culture, has a view on the world that I've never experienced before. That's going to challenge me to think differently about how I'm approaching this problem. And together we might come up with a more innovative solution than if we were from the same town, spoke the same language, had the same life experience kind of thing. So it is another aspect of diversity, but it's more about how do you leverage that kind of remote infrastructure that your company might have set up to then improve things like innovation and collaboration.
Okay, fantastic. And a pertinent point as well. And only to add to that, Lou, all of that has to be done with intentionality, with good writing about how you're going to operate with that. Again, with all the things we've touched on in terms of making sure that if you want to be an inclusive remote first company, that you need to do that. I think it's interesting, and I'm going to lean into something personal. I can't resist it. That when I was in a sort of hybrid model years ago, I don't even know if you would really call it that, at a university in Dublin, working at the point I was working there, coming off of maternity leave and just in the office a couple of days a week, building a new program at the university. When my daughter got extremely sick and I went fully remote out of no choice, that also was inclusion as a woman, as a parent, to be kept in the workforce. Unfortunately, that hybrid model, they didn't have a remote first angle. So what always comes to my mind, because it's a lived experience, and Matt, you did touch on this. If you're a hybrid company with one or two people, one that's remote first, that's fully remote, because they're disabled, whatever reason we can list, suddenly have to be caregiver for a temporary period of time, whatever reason, we need to appreciate how remote leads into that fully remote first. And is hybrid just an iteration of a remote model? So I'm kind of maybe bringing in my personal side where I began to see why remote first mattered more and where my bias has come from, okay? Because my bias does come from lived experience. Okay, so I see some fantastic questions coming through. Let's go with the cons. All right, so let's go with the cons. Who's got a con straight off of remote first? Matt, I think I'm going to go to you because I think you might have one just looking at your face. Like I'm picking that vibe up. Lee next.
I think I do.
Lee next. Hang on, then Lou, and then Ginny, just to set it up. Go ahead, Matt.
Sounds good. I think the bigger con of remote is its default, right? So, and its default specifically when it comes to communication. So if you have everyone in the same, and I'm going to frame this more in terms of in person versus remote, as opposed to necessarily hybrid versus remote. But I think if you have everyone under the same roof, you're in the same building, the default is you communicate. It's really awkward to be sitting with people in the same room and not exchange information, not talk, right? And I think especially if you're starting a company, there's a lot of uncertainty. You need to move fast. That sort of ease of communication, the fact that it's sort of default on, is hugely important, right? I think it can make or break a company, right? Remote is default no communication, right? If you just sort of put people randomly in different places around the world and you don't set any expectations around how they're going to talk and how they're going to interact with what frequency, what cadence, no communication will happen, or very little communication will happen. And I think this is especially important when things kind of go wrong. Like if people are struggling, right? In a remote environment, it's sometimes hard to see that, right? Because by default, that person is just, it's just gone. They're not there. We're not wired to see that, right? Whereas if you're in an office, like you see people coming in, you see their emotions, like you see their body language, like it's a lot easier to see a lot of these things. So it's like we were wired for that, right? And I think that's the biggest disadvantage of remote is that, and again, you can work around it. There's processes you can put in place, tools, infrastructure, like, but it is something that you have to acknowledge exists as a downside, and you have to be very deliberate about trying to minimize the effect of that downside. So I think that's the biggest con.
Wonderful, and I work with clients on that one as well in the terms of role-playing, Matt, which I'm sure you've heard in leadership, mentoring and coaching, where we look at the one-to-ones and how you can sort of plan out those situations where people hopefully will communicate with you virtually to really reveal that next level. Requires a load of EI, load of emotional intelligence, not easy to do. But I love that you've hit that one up because it is really a challenge. It's really, really difficult. And I think it's still evolving, to be honest. Let's go to you, Lee, then Lou, then Ginny. What is, from a remote first perspective, your biggest negative, Lee?
It's sort of piggybacking off what Matt said just there. So it's a con, but a potential opportunity. I think realistically, to make remote work, you need to get your culture right. And I think for many years, some companies believed that, I don't know, free coffee, bean bags was the heart to culture. You need to have a company culture that transcends much more than if you're in an office. And what do I mean by that? I think having a culture, and often it's the purpose or company values that can align and unite a team across different regions, cities, countries, I think is crucial. I think for remote work to work, you need high trust. And I think one of the cons is many companies have never truly worked on developing a culture and purpose that really transcends, having the values posted on a wall or free coffee. So that's a risk, it's a danger and a potential con, but also a great opportunity for companies. If adopting remote work, they really need to focus on some of those key principles that can really propel growth and success.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I love the way you've given the way you frame that as possible opportunity. Nice angle of the SWOT there, Lee. So well done. Over to you, Lou. What would you say is a con?
I'm going to look at it in the context of the kind of employee life cycle, if you will, and how employers are actually handling those key employment moments. So from onboarding the employee to what we see now, these kind of horrific layoffs happening where someone just gets an email randomly. All of those moments kind of get enhanced or magnified in a remote context potentially. Because there is that disconnect from having that one-to-one conversation in person, getting fired in a room versus getting an email from someone you've never actually physically met. All of those moments are potentially more emotionally embellished in a remote context. And I think from the employer's perspective, they need to be really careful about how do you can look at, we've got all these policies in place, we've got handbooks and everything like this. I saw someone put their whole remote handbook online last week to share. And I was thinking to myself, but what is that? How does that actually get implemented? Or every organization is going to think differently about those big moments: onboarding, onboarding an employee, terminating an employee. And you need culture, like Lee said, around how you handle those difficult things to do in order to make those moments not only effective from a company perspective, but beneficial ultimately for the employee in question, and making sure that that's a positive experience rather than a overwhelmingly negative one. And then making sure that the aftermath of that, getting fired and then being able to kind of still have that proximity and talking to someone about it is different than getting fired, getting cut off from your computer, getting your laptop returned to the UPS driver, and then not having any communication with that company again. So it's not necessarily an inherent con of remote work, but it's how that whole employee life cycle is handled by a company that does choose to be remote.
And Lou, that really leans into what Matt says, okay? Because you really have to think about how you're going to do that. The devil's in the detail. It's, it's not as easy. You maybe need to try different things. You have to react to different personalities because you haven't got the physical office that you might need into to get everyone into a room to do the all hands or whatever, etc., etc. So I love that point. I love that you've pulled that out, and I love that you've honestly, because we're in a climate of layoffs, called out that, because certainly it's a topic that we need to start talking about more. What is your layoff or your termination policy? And anyone, and I know people always join these webinars who are looking for remote first jobs and hybrid jobs and all the rest of it. Guys, in this climate, if you are interviewing, think about asking that question, because it's something I know some of my mentees ask, and it really helps them make a decision about the reaction to that. So thanks for bringing that up, Lou. It's a really interesting point. Ginny, give us a con for remote first. Maybe it will be easy for you.
I think, if I may, I have a couple, because I'd like to revisit your personal experience. But I think, it's similar to what Lou was just saying, actually. I think there is a real risk with creating gaps, right, and sort of expectation management. And if you have this awesome access to this global talent pool, the one thing that is certainly true is that people are more discerning around authenticity, right? And a company can profess to be any number of things, but how it behaves and how it actually demonstrates its actions, they speak much louder than words. So I think a con is often, again, that this becomes quite quickly a sort of a front end HR team's problem around how you interface with human beings and that sort of people experience. And on that side of things, I am steadfast that flexibility and choice are really important. But actually, I think this is primarily, and where it should begin, is more of a broader business operations conversation. So there are only very few companies that by design, and Matt talked about sort of early in an employer's sort of journey as a business, conceptually baking in being remote or being asynchronous and enabling people to work asynchronously, right? And the difference between multiplayer interfaces and self-serve visibility of information, so that if there are time zone overlaps, data flows, what is the correct information for us to be giving our customer at any given point in time, for example, all of that generally needs more investment than I think I see it getting in businesses that talk about being remote. So are you actually creating more dissonance for your employees in doing this? I think it's a question to ask, and to not immediately just go straight to the HR team, right? To think about it collectively and more holistically in terms of business ops. To your point around the experience that you had as a mother, I think also a number of businesses have forgotten that certainly it's the case in the UK, right? That flexible work arrangements they're now a day one right. And has the conversation about hybrid and remote, and again, these sort of really negative terms like distributed and away from each other, sort of enable businesses to perhaps let themselves off the hook when it comes to the flexibility that certainly by law you have to give people, right? Like flexible work arrangements have been a thing long before the pandemic, which is what I think ultimately has spawned an awful lot of this conversation. So I think there is also a really important point to make there around not forgetting the provisions that you should be making as a sort of baseline set of morals and ethics as a business anyway.
Beautiful and really well said, Ginny, and thanks for leaning into that, because that's the point. Remote enabled my flexibility, but without that flexibility and choice, doesn't matter about remote. Okay, remote is still there. So the employer has to support that. By the way, my university employer, but a bit of good news, and anyone out there who's thinking, wow, 7 years ago supported us to move completely from Ireland to Spain, and I'm still remote faculty with that university. So well before the pandemic. So hence why I do always bring in that personal experience, because to Ginny's point, it is about being inclusive. Parents, caregivers, all these other people, and enabling that flexible and point of choice. Now we have about 20 questions, guys. I've just noticed. So I'm just going to try, and I want everyone who's asked a question to just carefully, and I know that Charles has shared an article, which is the one about trying to help for 10 habits to ensure equality in your hybrid team. So many of you have asked questions looking at it that are saying stuff like, oh, you know, it's inequality or there's presenteeism. That's the article. I use it on many, many workshops. So if you've asked a question and it leans into unfairness, proximity bias, presenteeism, I see a few of them. I am not trying to fob you off, but I'm saying that that's one of the best articles that exists that covers a lot of those. So go to that article that Charles has shared in chat, and it might help answer some of those. I'm going to pick out a couple that we haven't covered yet. So Pana, I'm going to answer a couple of these and I'm going to throw them out to you. So we're coming into the last sort of 10 minutes. Can you be a remote hybrid company without being borderless? I'm going to answer that directly. Yes, of course you can. It's called local or geographically remote hybrid setup. It doesn't always, depending on your sector and your location and where you're setting up, it doesn't mean you have to go borderless. Obviously, you're on a webinar that's focusing on that today, but they do exist. It's called local, geographic, remote or hybrid. Welcome. It doesn't matter that you haven't gone completely internationally. You've heard all the pros and cons here. If you're doing it locally and you're enabling, that's fantastic. So hopefully that's answered that question for you. On some of the models I've seen, that's beginning to be called out from a research and a sort of model, business model or organizational model perspective. Why do US companies offer do not offer remote company? Why do US companies not offer positions for non-US citizens? Many, many reasons. To get that one out of the way, compliance or tax issues possibly. Maybe it's not part of their strategy. I don't want to bring that into the debate today because it's not something we can answer. It'll be very